Hey everybody, Marcus here. So I got a phone call from one of my MGTOW-minded friends asking if I wanted to go see the new Star Wars movie with him. Well, as I enjoy sci-fi and have seen all the previous installments of the series, I decided to accept his offer to see the movie. Now, before seeing this movie, I had no awareness of any aspect about what it would contain. I had not seen any trailers or heard any rumors as to the plot. The extent of my knowledge, in fact, was solely contained to me being aware that this movie exists. Upon arriving to the cinema, I had made a prediction to my friend as to what this movie will be like. Now, I predicted it would be somewhere between Jar Jar Binks and Sense8. Now, with this expectation firmly set, I can safely say that, well, I was not disappointed. With that said, let us cover the positive aspects of the film first. The movie went back to the artistic style, reminiscent of the ways the original trilogy was filmed. The use of green screens was put on the back seat in lieu of using puppets, and hand-built sets. This gave the movie a pleasant and natural feel, which had been lacking in episode 1 through 3. Now, let us move on to the rest of the film. As the movie begins, we are quickly introduced to the First Order, which, to my understanding, was a PR exercise of rebranding the Empire. All the familiar ships and motifs of the Empire recreated in the First Order, from the humble TIE fighter to the enormous triangular ships which come across more enormous than their original incarnations. The Empire's PR team had apparently thought it prudent to adopt a Hitler-esque disposition. This is made obvious later in the movie, where General Adolf, as I call him, is all but foaming at the mouth, spewing a speech to thousands of stormtroopers standing in battalion formation. The color symbolism and arrangement of flags, as well as the design of the new Empire flag itself, is all but stolen from video footage of Hitler's speeches. The new Empire has been rebranded to be irrationally evil in a way that the Empire never was in the original series. Now, I suppose the battalions of stormtroopers are also meant to add to the Hitler-esque mystique, as a stormtrooper's uniform is white. Perhaps this was meant to show that white people are evil? But this new Empire also seems to be progressively evil, as we come to meet Token Black Iscariot. Indeed, Token Black Iscariot is the only black character I noticed in the entire movie. Now, it is one of those strange realizations that only comes to you when the movie is over. Now, Token has a moral crisis when given an order to gun down a bunch of peasants. A moral crisis that could have only come as a consequence of his stint as a janitor on planet Final Solution, as it is revealed that stormtroopers in the new Empire are indoctrinated since birth to the ideology of the new Empire. Now, I'm pretty sure there were mandatory affirmative consent classes thrown in there somewhere as well. Not only is Token's moral crisis highly unbelievable, his character also suggests there's some sort of career progression within the new Empire if indeed he graduated from janitor to stormtrooper. Soon after we meet Token, we also meet Darth Emo, the son of Han Solo and new Heir General Leia. Apparently, Leia had been demoted from royalty to mere general in the series due to a modern animosity towards princesses. Now, if we are to accept Leia as the leader of the Resistance, which has also undergone a PR rebranding from the Rebel Alliance, we can safely conclude that she is a piss-poor general. The simple question that comes up is, how did the new Rebel Alliance not sabotage the construction of Planet Final Solution? I mean, that project must have taken decades to complete, and the amount of money and manpower required would be impossible to conceal. In addition to this, how did the new Empire ever have time to come into being after the rebels defeated the Empire in Episode 6? I mean, it's like the new Empire was just given 40 years to work in peace. So, yes, she is a piss poor general. But I digress. Darth Emo is just too much fun as a character. From observing his behavior, he is best characterized as a teenager undergoing a heavy dose of teenage angst that has never had a girlfriend but desperately wanted one. You know, an Elliot Rogers TFLer. Now, this should not be taken as some sort of shaming of this man. It is merely an observation that becomes too hilarious later on. His temper tantrums at various points in the movie, followed by smashing his surroundings, would only naturally transition into a habit of cutting. What is also hilarious about Darth Emo is one scene in which he confesses to the audience that he is tempted by the light side, and that Voldemort, his master, may be sensing that. Now, I'm no Star Wars fanboy, but I have pieced together a thing or two about the workings of the Star Wars world. It is my understanding that the Force is like a book with two chapters. Chapter 1 is the light side of the Force, and Chapter 2 is the dark side of the Force. Jedi read Chapter 1 and then are warned not to read Chapter 2. In this way, they can be tempted by the dark side of the Force, namely to read Chapter 2. Now, a Sith is someone who has read Chapter 1, then through being tempted by Chapter 2, reads Chapter 2. In this way, he can control both sides of the Force. Now, being tempted by the dark side of the Force, well, it makes sense. But the opposite, being tempted by the light side, does not. So what exactly is Darth Emo tempted by? Did Voldemort only teach Darth Emo Chapter 2? Was this some sort of moral line he won't let Darth Emo cross? Voldemort authorizes the destruction of like 5 planets through the use of the weapon on planet Final Solution, which he apparently finds no ethical problem with. Oh, but teaching Darth Emo the light side of the Force is just a bridge too far. It makes no sense. And if Darth Emo already knows the light side of the Force, then there's nothing to be tempted by. The thing is, even if Darth Emo did renounce his ways, he would still need to be trialed and put to death for crimes against humanity, or alien enemy, something like that. The whole redemption motif cannot end in any way for such a character other than death, as the post-redemption consequences would end no differently than the Nuremberg trials. What can Darth Emo say? He was just following orders? It didn't work out so well for the Nazis, after all, and the new empire is modeled after them, after all. But for the time, let us move on from Darth Emo to Strong Independent Woman. Now, Strong Independent Woman, the other main character alongside Token Black Iscariot, is some scavenger on a desert planet. Her setting, is identical to the origins of Luke Skywalker. To the extent that her clothing even looks the same as Luke's clothing in the first movie. We are introduced to Strong Independent Woman after she has hauled back a load of garbage to some salvage merchant who swiftly informs her that said load is only worth a quarter portion. Now, the language they used can only be some vague, perhaps unintentional reference to the pay gap? Though the salvage merchant is an alien whose species may very well not be sexually reproducing, his voice is clearly masculine, which suggests that sexism against straight white women is still alive and well in a galaxy far, far away. Now, Strong Independent Woman is the least believable character in the entire movie. However, that is just my male mind trying to make sense of this woman because I can clearly see a path in female logic in justifying her. Firstly, Strong Independent Woman, seemingly abandoned as a child, for no accountable reason, seems to be a pilot reminiscent of Iceman from Top Gun, across all spacecraft as if there's some sort of standard interface between different spacecraft. Not only this, but she is apparently immensely talented in hand-to-hand combat. Now, this quality has a bit more credibility as the planet she is on would lend itself to such a skill set. However, how she is a better fighter than any of the other locals who clearly would have also adopted this proficiency, is never explained, as I presume no such explanation is possible. Next, She seems to have extensive and universal mastery of engineering, as is made clear by her immediate awareness of the nature of a gas leak in the Millennium Falcon, as well as her opening up some strange panel on Planet Final Solution, then crawling into the opening, and also her skills in operating the door system of the freighter on which Han Solo and Chewbacca come in on. Now, her bag of tricks does not end there. In addition to this, she apparently is a fairly competent sword fighter, even though nothing suggests she has ever held a lightsaber at any point in her life before the events of this movie. Now, outside of magically being a master at disciplines that no human being could possibly be a master of given her age and environment, the quality that she possesses that I find least believable is her stoicism. Strong, independent woman is completely unshakable. Now, this itself is not impossible, but it is the juxtaposition to the other characters that makes this completely unrealistic. Token Black is a coward and emotionally driven, even though he was supposedly bred from birth to be a killing machine. Darth Emo is an angst-ridden teenager, even though he was supposedly undergone years of training. The male characters are painted as either bumbling idiots or emotionally unstable, while Strong Independent Woman is painted as a composed stoic, even though the backstory of the male characters is appropriate to such a disposition, whereas Strong Independent Woman's is not. Now, what makes Strong Independent Woman even funnier is her general stupidity and retardation in applying logic. There is built-in cognitive dissonance in this character. Strong, independent woman is apparently so talented in all these ways, and yet she never figured out she can use those said skills to make money, as opposed to scavenging and living impoverished. It simply makes no sense. What also does not make any sense is her pipe dream that her parents will ever return to find her. Now, though the backstory of Strong Independent Woman is only loosely conveyed through flashbacks, it is clear that this woman, who possesses skills that demand a strong command of reason, cannot seem to apply this reason to her own plight. Why does she need to physically wait for her parents to return? I mean, she can't leave a message with the locals as to her whereabouts in case her parents do return? I mean, she can't. I don't know. Maybe go looking for them herself? Apparently not. Apparently, all she can do is sit in the desert waiting for her problems to solve themselves. Strong, independent woman, however, I believe is justified in the feminist mind through the principle of worth through existence. I think that they justify the skill set of strong, independent woman because of what she is, as opposed to things like, well, training. It is clear that Strong Independent Woman is the replacement of Luke Skywalker as the central figure of this new trilogy. In fact, this movie is a verbatim rehash of Episode 4, including, well, poor man's Yoda. Feel the force, Strong Independent Woman. It is all around you, like a midichlorian bukkake. Now, despite the shortcomings in logic as to the construction of Strong Independent Woman, and Star Wars now being, well, a Disney IP, this nonetheless does not stop the writers from sneaking in a rape scene. When Strong Independent Woman is captured by Darth Emo, she is strapped in a chair reminiscent of 50 Shades BDSM, on which, well, Darth Emo tries to use the Force to penetrate her mind with no apparent affirmative consent given. Well, the good news is that, well, Darth Emo's trying to mind read, so in theory, he may have gotten affirmative consent that the audience simply does not audibly hear. But if he did sense consent in her mind, the question still beckons. Was it enthusiastic? Now, this scene would not be any different than the almost identical scene that transpired between Darth Emo and this other rebellion fighter pilot, except for the strangely sexual suggestive language that Darth Emo used during the interrogation. The scene had this teenage awkwardness no different than the Sith equivalent of failing to unclip a chick's bra. Darth Emo attempts to penetrate Strong Independent Woman's mind with an intense stare that could have only been interpreted as the male gaze mixed in with stare rape, which was immediately brought to mind through sexually suggestive language. Now, in all fairness, I was laughing quite intensely throughout this scene because of the ludicrous dialogue, so I may have missed something, though I doubt it. This scene again reinforces the ludicrous nature of both these characters. Apparently, a very well trained master of the Force can be held at bay by an untrained woman who just earlier that day came to believe, well, that the Force is even real. Once again, the skill of strong, independent women cannot be accounted for, and the incompetence of the man, in spite of training, is underlined. I do not quite recall exactly, but I'm pretty sure Darth Emo went into a hissy fit after this incident. Again, I was laughing very hard, undoubtedly confusing those around me. Now, this one-directional sexual tension between Darth Emo and strong, independent woman comes up one more time near the end of the movie, when Darth Emo had been injured, and his sound medical training compelled him to continually strike his wound as some Sith version of a chest thump. A clash of lightsabers occurred. The absence of immediate overpowerment of strong, independent woman by Darth Emo can only be accounted for by his supposed injury that does not appear to impede his freedom of motion in any meaningful way. Anyways, while the lightsabers are locked, Darth Emo offers to train strong, independent woman in the ways of the Force. This question is so out of place as it is implied that he is actually losing the fight. This plea to act as her mentor comes across as some sort of Sith version of bragging about having a cool car. Now, Darth Emo's pathetic demonstration of manginaism almost does not come as a surprise considering the absurdity of the whole fight. Now, I've trained with a swordmaster before. Let me tell you, a swordmaster can kill a beginner in literally 2 to 3 seconds. Sword fighting is not a theatrical performance, but a methodical and calculated set of conditioned motions and stances. You can't wing it. Since to my knowledge Darth Emo is supposed to be a trained swordmaster, and strong, independent woman held the lightsaber in her hands for the first time that very day, Darth Emo would have cut her down without blinking. I mean, this was properly reflected in the original trilogy. When Luke was emotionally wailing on Vader, Vader was clearly not even trying, and when he did, he disarmed Luke with no effort. Now, this made sense, as Luke was not trained. However, the scene we witnessed in this movie does not even have plausible deniability built into it. Even if strong, independent woman had some Force-induced edge over every other amateur sword fighter, this disregard for the time it takes to learn such a weapon is also apparent in scenes where we have Token Black wielding a lightsaber. Even Token is spared the need to train with the weapon to demonstrate some level of proficiency. But let us look at the movie as a whole. The movie is around 2.5 hours. The first hour is a plot-impoverished action scene. Almost nothing happens during that first hour, and you can count several sequences that could have been completely removed without detracting from the plot that this movie did have. The plot that does appear, however, is all but a verbatim translation of the original trilogy. Nothing original was introduced that I could see. However, this would not have been all that bad if it was not a watered-down version of the elements from the original series. Every corresponding element in this movie is worse than the one that preceded it, with poor man's Yoda being a shining exemplar of this phenomenon. As a whole, this movie is a poor man's Star Wars movie. I'm not even going to mention the Deus Ex Machina moment with R2-D2. You sit there watching it with an ever-growing desire for the movie to just end. You don't like any of the characters, which overflows to your sentiment to the factions that they belong to. The Empire are caricatures of the Nazis, with their main representative an angst-ridden TFLer. The rebels come across as grossly incompetent and generally useless, as they could not even protect the governing body that was supposedly bankrolling their operation. In fact, what you want to happen is for everyone to die. You hope that this movie was a false start for this new trilogy. You hope that the next movie in the series is really going to be the first, with a whole new set of characters. But I cannot say the movie disappointed me, because I came in with the correct expectation. It was indeed somewhere between Jar Jar Binks and Sense8. It has the idiocy of Jar Jar Binks spread out across the characters, but mostly contained in the slapstick nonsense of Token Black Iscariot. Sense8 grade feminism was also liberally sprinkled throughout the movie, from Token's white knighting, to the nonsensical, overpowered nature of strong, independent woman, to the painting of the male characters as bumbling idiots who are clearly waiting for a woman to save the galaxy. The themes in this movie, as Mad Max Fury Road subtly anticipated, is only going to continue. Star Wars, like Mad Max, are a very well established cultural phenomenon. They clearly cannot go unscathed simply because of their ability to reach large audiences. The same phenomenon can be expected of any IP that has this much cultural reach. My recommendation is to wait for this to come to DVD. Then get your buddies together with a few cases of beer and rip into the shit while watching it. These movies can still be entertaining, but only as objects of ridicule. Thanks for listening. Go team.